Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El-Rom.
And I'm Rebecca Rand.
In our top story, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was in Saudi Arabia recently for talks with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. This remarkable achievement was made possible by the administration of U.S. President Donald Trump, which exposed the threat the Iranian regime poses to the Middle East and also demonstrated that moderate Arab states and Israel are natural allies. Netanyahu commented that thanks to our steadfast posture against Iran, many Arab states view Israel differently. If we continue building our strength and shore up our ties with the moderate Arab camp, we will see more countries follow this path. Riyadh has yet to formally agree to diplomatic relations with Jerusalem, but it has allowed Israel the use of Saudi airspace. President Trump believes that Saudi Arabia will soon join Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Sudan in normalizing ties with the Jewish state.
Mike Pompeo has become the first U.S. Secretary of State to visit a community in the Jewish heartland on an official state visit. 1 year ago, Pompeo effectively recognized the Jewish right to self-determination in the historic homeland of Israel by announcing that he does not believe that Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria are illegal. Psagot Winery in Samaria named one of their blends Pompeo after the Secretary of State in honor of his important announcement. They presented him with a bottle during his historic visit to their community, where he made the landmark announcement that imports produced in the Jewish heartland of Judea and Samaria will be labeled as made in Israel. He also announced that the United States will regard the anti-Israel boycott, divest, and sanctions movement as anti-Semitic. Pompeo said the White House will immediately take steps to identify the organizations that engage in hateful BDS conduct and withdraw U.S. government support from such groups. Following his visit to Psagot, Pompeo traveled to the Golan Heights. Last year, President Trump recognized Israel's sovereignty over the strategic location, and Pompeo reaffirmed this position, saying the Golan is a central part of Israel.
World leaders are concerned over Iran's nuclear progress and are calling on the rogue Islamic Republic to stop violating previous nuclear accords. Officials from Germany, France, and England held talks regarding Tehran's flagrant nuclear misbehavior. The foreign ministers from the three world powers met in Berlin to discuss ways to revive the disastrous JCPOA nuclear deal brokered by the Obama administration. Ahead of the conference, a spokeswoman for the German Foreign Ministry strongly urged Iran to stop violating the agreement and return to fulfilling its nuclear obligations completely. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned against re-engaging with Tehran, saying there can be no going back to the previous nuclear agreement. We must stick to an uncompromising policy of ensuring that Iran will not develop nuclear weapons.
The 30-second coronavirus test, jointly developed by Israel and India, has completed and passed the testing phase of development. The very last stage before mass production is a calibration intended to set technical parameters to improve the test's efficiency. Israeli ambassador to India, Ron Malka, said that this test will be good for the entire world, and an official with Israel's defense ministry said that the rapid check could be a game changer. A senior-level Israeli delegation from the Directorate of Defense Research and Development has been in India since July, developing the fast test with their Indian counterparts.
The senseless slaughter of Christians at the hands of radical Muslims in Nigeria continues unchecked. The Islamist Boko Haram terrorist group, which aims to establish an Islamic state in West Africa, has waged war against African Christians. In the first half of 2020, more than 1,200 African Christians were murdered, adding to the 11,000 who were killed during the previous 5 years. An expert on the subject said thousands of churches have been torched, children massacred, pastors beheaded, and homes and fields set ablaze by the terrorists who target Christians for their faith alone.
A startling report released by an Israeli non-governmental organization reveals that the Palestinian Authority could be diverting European Union funds to pay the salaries of Arab terrorists. The EU provides hundreds of millions of dollars to the PA to cover the salaries of civil servants and employees in the education sector. Palestinian Media Watch reported that EU aid is susceptible to manipulation, citing the example of the recent salary cuts by the PA, while EU aid has remained constant. In a press release, Palestinian Media Watch said European Union aid to the Palestinian Authority is indirectly used to help fund terrorist salaries against the intentions of the EU.
Save a Child's Heart, the Israeli non-governmental organization that performs life-saving heart surgeries on children, marked its 5,555th procedure. Save a Child's Heart brings Palestinian children and other youngsters from around the world to Israel for medical procedures. It also teaches doctors how to perform surgeries so they can treat children with heart conditions in their own communities. So far, the NGO has trained medical professionals and helped children from 62 countries in Africa, the Middle East, Asia, Europe, and South America. 50% of them were Palestinians.
The FBI is reporting a significant increase in anti-Semitic attacks in the United States. Federal officials announced a 14% jump in assaults on Jews last year. They recorded the highest level of hate crimes in a decade and announced that the number of anti-Jewish motivated murders doubled from the previous year. The 953 attacks against Jews made up for 62% of all hate crimes based on religion. In light of the increasing threat to Jews worldwide, the Secure Community Network has developed a training program to help combat extremist and terrorist actions targeting Jews. The curriculum focuses on active threat and emergency life-saving responses. The program was developed for every member of the community. Parents, students, principals, rabbis, and their congregations will be provided with techniques and strategies to save lives in an emergency.
The Israeli Navy has welcomed the newest generation of warships, which will become the backbone of Israel's maritime defenses for decades to come. Naval Commander Eli Sharvit traveled to Germany to receive the first of 6 ships purchased by the Jewish state, which he said are excellent, precise, optimal, and versatile vessels armed with the best defensive and offensive combat systems that are at the forefront of world military technology. Israel's Navy is responsible for protecting 44,000 square kilometers of sea above and below the surface, as well as Israel's strategic infrastructure, such as commercial shipping lanes and offshore natural gas rigs. The Hezbollah terror group in Lebanon is seen as one of the greatest threats that the Israeli Navy must defend against. The Iranian-backed terror group has amassed 150,000 missiles and has repeatedly threatened to strike Israel's natural gas reserves in the Mediterranean Sea. 4 Israeli sailors were killed in 2006 when Hezbollah fired an anti-ship missile at an Israeli naval patrol boat.
Jerusalem's iconic Tower of David Museum has launched a massive renovation and conservation project while archaeologists study the ancient fortress, which dates back over 2,500 years. Archaeologist Amit Re'em explained that some of the layers that they're exploring have never been excavated or studied. Re'em's team is using 3D imaging to examine artifacts from each time period. The $40 million project aims to revitalize the site, which involves a total redesign of the museum's exhibits with cutting-edge media to tell the story of Jerusalem's history.
Turning to sports, and Israeli judoka Peter Palchik won the gold medal at the European Judo Championships in Prague. Israel's Tal Flicker was awarded the silver medal at that same competition. Both are considered Israel's top athletes, and both are in contention to compete in the upcoming Olympic Games in Tokyo. President Reuven Rivlin congratulated the athletes and their team, saying, "Our hearts warmed at the sight of the summit you conquered tonight in Prague." And in other sports-related news, Deni Avdija became the first top 10 NBA draft pick from Israel. The Washington Wizards scooped up the 19-year-old and welcomed him to the U.S. Capitol. Avdija will be the 3rd Israeli to play in the NBA, following Omri Caspi and Gal Mekel. And in the second round of the draft, the Boston Celtics grabbed Tel Aviv Hapoel's point guard, Yam Madar. We are living in mysterious yet miraculous times. We've witnessed the most remarkable fulfillment of biblical prophecy, the Jewish people's return to Israel, and the prosperity and contributions of this tiny country in such a short time. Yet we've also seen an unexpected rise in anti-Semitism, which takes the form of anti-Zionism and alliances between groups that are fighting against the most fundamental biblical values. In the book Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel, Josh Reinstein answers important questions to clarify what has driven political action from the time that the Roman Emperor Titus destroyed Jerusalem until today, when President Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Get your copy today and learn how faith-based diplomacy has changed the world. To order your advance copy, go to triumphofisrael.com.
That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host Josh Reinstein and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Moshe Rogosnitzky. He is the Executive Director of the MedInsight Institute. Moshe, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Josh. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Tell us a little bit about what is the MedInsight Institute.
MedInsight is a nonprofit US Israel-based educational institute that focuses on utilizing existing resources to deliver fresh treatment opportunities for patients suffering from cancer and chronic diseases. When I say existing resources, we talk about drug repurposing.
So tell us a little bit about what is drug repurposing.
Right, so to understand drug repurposing, we have to understand the drug development process. It usually takes 14 years to develop a new drug, and it costs up to $2 billion to achieve that. In order to enable pharmaceutical companies to invest that amount of time and money in developing a new drug, governments give a patent protection, which usually lasts for 20 years from discovery of that new molecule. And that enables them to recoup that investment. Now, we traditionally think of drugs as having an effect, an intended effect, and a host of side effects. And when you look at the product insert in any drug, you see that long list of side effects. But what we don't realize is many drugs also have side benefits. And the longer a drug has been around, the more of these side benefits have been discovered primarily by patients who tell their doctors, you know, the drug you gave me for this purpose happened to do this. And then the doctor says, that's interesting, watches, does that happen to other patients too, and then documents that. And that takes us to what's called drug repurposing. Now, drug repurposing splits two ways. One way, we can take this drug and say, we want to put it through an FDA process to check, to verify that it's actually useful for this new use. Rather than spend $2 billion and 14 years, that can be done in as little as 3 years at a cost of $20 or $30 million. And the other option is what we call real-world drug repurposing. As a physician, the doctor is able to prescribe that drug immediately, what's called off-label drug use, and doesn't have to wait for that drug to get regulatory approval for that new use.
We saw this during the coronavirus. A lot of doctors were giving the malaria pill for coronavirus, and then they were saying use a steroid for asthma for the symptoms. But then doctors came out and said you can't do that anymore. Why did they stop the repurposing of these drugs for coronavirus?
So repurposing hasn't really stopped. It just faces challenges. And we're trying to, in the world of repurposing, we're changing the way doctors and patients think about medicine. And we're saying we can achieve success with resources that are available to us right now. We know the cost of medicine today is completely unsustainable. And in fact, in December, before anyone knew that Corona was around the corner, FDA and NIH sponsored a 2-day conference in Washington, D.C. There were 300 participants there, scientists, doctors from around the world. And the focus was, how can we repurpose off-patent drugs? Dr. Chris Austin, the chairman of NCATS, which is the National Center for Advancement of Translational Sciences at NIH, he opened the conference and he welcomed the dawn of a new era in medicine. And he said some amazing things. He said we have 6,500 diseases that have no treatment. At the current rate of drug development, it will take 2,000 years till we find solutions for all these diseases.
But Moshe, we saw this during the coronavirus. President Trump came out and tried to suggest things like that could be used. Other doctors came out and said that these medicines will work with corona, and they were banned from social media, they were blacklisted, no one would talk to them, they were not allowed to get their message out. So was that just a political thing, or are doctors actually against the repurposing of medicine?
I would say doctors are not against. Doctors are always looking for new tools to help the patients. There's a fear in regulatory circles that this may get out of hand, that this may be termed as snake oil. And that is exactly what the FDA and NIH conference was out there to solve. And as Dr. Austin said, we have drugs on the shelves right now at a local pharmacy that can help those 6,500 diseases which are considered untreatable. You say, how is it that we're not making that available to patients? So regulators are moving in that direction, and we have to catch up and say this is a new reality. If we can take a drug that's safe, safety is well established, and when you talk about an off-patent or a generic drug, it's been around 20 years. We know a lot about its safety. What do we have to lose by using that for a corona patient who we want to avoid him going to hospital where we know how difficult it is to treat him? And what better example do we have than citizen number one in the world, President Trump, who was treated by his physician, by the White House physician, with off-label drugs, famotidine, which is called Pepcid. I was privileged to publish the first study in April of this year suggesting it be used for COVID-19. President Trump used that as part of a successful treatment cocktail. So if something is available to President Trump, who's the number one and most protected citizen in the world, shouldn't it be available to all of us?
Absolutely, and I think something that's very interesting about this is that this message isn't getting out there. Why do not people know even the term repurposed medicine? This is something I'm learning about just in the last few months.
So here's exactly the problem. There are no financial interests behind it. In the United States, the pharmaceutical industry invests $10 billion a year in marketing drugs to patients, directly to patients, called DTC, direct-to-consumer advertising. And you see it on television, and you hear it on the radio, and every media you pick up is full of ads for drugs. But those are only for the 500 drugs out of 10,000 drugs that exist in the world that are patent protected. But those 9,500 drugs that have no patents in them, there are no interests who are going to promote this, who are going to invest in getting this message out. And this is where the great opportunity lies with drug repurposing. We have these gems buried there in the medical literature. And it's not something so simple. When we say buried in the medical literature, every week there are 50,000 new publications in the medical literature, 2.5 million publications every year. Someone has to go and look for those gems there and find those treatment opportunities and synthesize them in a way that the doctor and patient can read quickly and get the message out there. And there is no commercial interest in sponsoring that process.
You mentioned that to get a new vaccine out, it takes roughly 14 years and $2 billion. Yet Pfizer last month said they cured coronavirus, they have the vaccine. How were they able to do it in such light speed time?
So I was talking about a new drug. Vaccine development is a completely different area. But yes, I'm sure Pfizer has put in a good few $1 billion into developing that. And it remains to be seen how successful that's going to be, because we're right at the beginning of a relatively very small study. We're now hearing about mutations developing in this virus. And if that happens in a few months, we may need a new vaccine over here. So vaccine development is wonderful, and we have to invest resources in that. But at the same time, we have to ask ourselves, what can we do with available resources for patients who are suffering now and are not able to wait for that vaccine to become available?
Moshe, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
We need patient power over here. Patients can drive the change needed in medicine and the shift in the focus from commercial, expensive drugs to off-label repurposing candidates that are available now, right now, on the shelf of every pharmacy. We need patients as advocates, and we need the resources to enable us, as you said, Josh, to spread this message around to the world and offer us the hope that we need right now.
Thank you, Moshe, for being on the show, and thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
Up next, the return to Zion with Karen Hayesod.
Shalom and welcome to the Return to Zion with Keren HaYesod United Israel Appeal. I'm Sam Grunberg, World Chairman of Keren HaYesod, the leading official fundraising organization for the State of Israel. The story of the Ethiopian Jews returning to their homeland have moved people around the world. Let's listen to the story of two individuals who are making a profound difference. God bless you from Jerusalem.
A mission to Ethiopia. Through their deep faith, Roy and Yuklin Chen, a devout Bible-believing Christian couple from Hong Kong, received a sign from heaven, revealing their personal mission in life. They found it in an amazing series of inspired events that took them on a transformative spiritual journey along a road strewn with signs and wonders to help realize God's promise to return the exiled people of Israel back to their ancestral homeland.
In 2006, on November the 11th at 5 o'clock in the morning, the Lord woke me up and started to tell me to look up different books, chapter 11, verse 11, which is that He will bring His children from all corners of the world back home, including places like Cush. After we found out that Cush is Ethiopia and was praying, meditating on Psalm 87, suddenly the Lord says, bring the Ethiopian Jews back.
They traveled all the way from Hong Kong to Ethiopia, where they were joined by Eliezer Moody Sandberg, World Chairman of Keren HaYesod, who is tasked with bringing the rest of the Ethiopian Jews back to Israel.
After 2 years of hearing from God, a specific assignment that we now have a chance to actually participate in something so historically significant. We felt the Lord telling us to actually meet with the remaining Ethiopian Jews, to encourage them, to remind them that Father God, Abba, has not forgotten them, but that in His perfect time, He will bring them back, His sons and daughters.
The Lord says, stop everything and write everything down. And He gave us Isaiah 17, 18, and 19. And then He says, call the world 777. We didn't understand what it meant. This year is the year 5777. So we wondered whether this is the year that we are to call the world to support the Aliyah of the Velash Mura and of the other lost tribes.
The Israeli government has just authorized the movement of, at the time, the last batch of Ethiopian Jews back to Israel. And the operation was going to be called Operation Wings of the Dove. This is the piece of jewelry that I picked up for my wife, and the name of the operation was called the Wings of a Dove. I showed it to everyone at the meeting, and everyone was totally shocked. All of us started to weep. This was a divine appointment.
Inspired by the Ethiopian Jewish community's love for the God, state, and people of Israel, this journey strengthened their determination to fulfill this biblical prophecy and inspire others to help bring an exile of almost 3,000 years to a final close.
We feel very blessed to be here with you, because we were sent to come here. We just want to make an appeal, if we can, and ask that you, as you watch this and hear our story, that you would also first pray for the Ethiopian Jews, that they would be able to be brought back quickly, safely, and that secondly, whether God has called you also to support this movement.
We have visited their camp in Gondor. Many of them have died while waiting to go home.
Together, we will bring all our brothers and sisters back to Jerusalem. Toda Rabba. Thank you very much.
Thus said the Lord God, behold, I will lift up my hand to the nations and set up my standard to the peoples. And they will bring your sons into their bosom, and your daughters will be carried on their shoulders. Isaiah chapter 49, verse 22.
Due to the coronavirus pandemic, we're expecting a massive wave of aliyah from Jewish communities all around the world. Help us bring them home, and let's bless Israel together.
To donate and get information, visit khisrael.org. The biblical prophecy is unfolding right before our very eyes. The people of Israel are returning to the Promised Land after 2,000 years of exile. But millions of Jews are still longing to come home. Bless Israel by supporting Keren HaYesod United Israel Appeal, the leading official fundraising organization for the State of Israel. Together, we can fulfill the prophecy of the Bible.
Let's bless Israel together.
To donate and get information, visit khisrael.org.
The State of Israel is Jewish and democratic. I'm proud of the vibrant democracy we've built in our ancestral homeland. Israel grants equal rights to all citizens, regardless of religion, race, nationality, or gender. We are strong not in spite of our diversity. We're strong because of our diversity. The nation-state law defines the rights of the Jewish people to self-determination in Israel. It also maintains the rights of all Israeli citizens, Jews and non-Jews alike, to preserve their culture, their heritage, their language, and their identity. The new law affirms Israel's commitment to preserving the bond between Israel and Jews around the world. The unity of our people is a key source of our strength. Israel will continue to be a home for all Jews, no matter where you are from or how you pray. Israel's democracy will always continue to flourish. For that, we can all be proud.
Lift up your eyes and look around. All your children gather and come to you. The biblical prophecy is unfolding right before our very eyes. The people of Israel are returning to the Promised Land after 2,000 years of exile. But millions of Jews are still longing to come home. Anti-Semitism threatens many of the Jews. We must rescue them before the window of opportunity slams shut. Bless Israel by supporting Keren HaYesod United Israel Appeal, the leading official fundraising organization for the State of Israel. Together, we can fulfill the prophecy of the Bible.
Let's bless Israel together.
To donate and get information, visit our website at www.khisrael.org.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan Elron.
And I'm Rebecca Rand, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Please join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.